Hello and welcome to the Educators Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world. Conversations where we stay curious for just a little longer about the issues, challenges and opportunities which we are facing in our schools and our communities. So whether you're walking, running, cooking or just relaxing, I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you want to go beyond the corner and explore the issues from each episode more deeply, please subscribe to Kai Pod News, the newsletter for curious educators who want to keep the conversation going between episodes. Today, I'm joined by Professor Deborah Eyre, Global Educational Leader, founder of High Performance Learning and a pioneer in helping good schools become truly world-class. For almost half a century, the school improvement and inspection model has dominated how education systems think about quality, driving up standards in many contexts, but also, some would argue, narrowing what counts as success. In her new book, The 10th Anniversary of High Performance Learning, How to Become a World-Class School, Professor Eyre makes a bold claim that this model has now run its course and is no longer fit for the complex, fast-changing world our young people are entering. In our conversation today, we'll explore why Professor Eyre believes that school inspection needs a fundamental redesign and what a more trust-based, capability-building approach might look like, and how schools and systems can move from being merely good to genuinely world-class for every learner. Welcome to the show. How is your week shaping up so far?
Well, thanks very much for having me, Kai. And it's just great to be able to do this. Yes, my week's pretty good. Obviously, in England, it's raining, but we can expect that, can't we?
We can at this time of year. So we're recording this in the middle of January, and it's fairly typical January-type weather. Let's dive straight into this very important topic that you are starting to talk about in your new book. You say that school improvement has had its day. What are you seeing in schools that tells you the current model is no longer working?
So I guess I'd really like to kind of start by why I want to talk about it, in the sense that I think school improvement is stopping schools from becoming world-class, because the methodologies that it deploys are deliberately designed to create general competence. And it's built on a kind of deficit model that assumes that schools are not doing well and that needs to be rectified. So when I see that applied in schools, what I feel is that there's an overall climate of, well, mostly partly anxiety, but also that it just sucks the joy out of teaching and learning. Everybody's just concerned about whether they're doing it right rather than whether they are enjoying the process of learning as a student or as a teacher teaching your learners. And the consequences of that, we know from research in a wide variety of contexts, are really quite significant. So, what we've got is we've got statistics about unhappy staff. We've got statistics about unhappy students who don't want to go to school and are not enjoying being there. We've got data from places like PISA that are saying that the highest and lowest performing students are not doing well. So it's okay as a broad brush approach, but it's not working for everyone. We've got a whole problems around social mobility. First and foremost for me, the most important thing is that we're just not equipping our students, as you said, to live in the life that they need to inhabit when they leave school. So school improvement has done its job. It has created a system where we have, broadly speaking, agreement on what we think is a good school, and the vast majority of schools are achieving that. In England, 90% of schools are deemed to be good or outstanding. But what we've got is a system which is geared at the 10% that don't reach that, rather than helping the 90% to move on to a next level.
Let's just stay curious about that for a moment longer, Deborah. Where's the disconnect between what the inspection system is telling us, 90% of schools are good, but we have serious issues with student well-being and serious issues with staff well-being, and some would argue that is at least partly responsible for the teacher recruitment crisis that we've been in for a while now. What's going on there?
Let me start by saying that inspection is a symptom of school improvement. It's not just something on its own. It is a symptom of school improvement because school improvement moved our education world from where it was a long time ago when I started teaching, where there wasn't consensus about what it meant to be a good school. And school improvement brought in a template that says this is what a good school would be doing. And as part of that process, it identifies a series of key performance indicators. And what inspection does is simply to say, are you ticking the box on each of these key performance indicators? And the consequence of that is that it drives interest within a school and preoccupies schools with meeting that particular criteria. But what's happening is that there are unintended consequences of that. And we've known about this over a long period of time. So when I wrote my book in my original book in 2016, lots of the big researchers into school effectiveness and school improvement were already saying, look, this has done a good job in getting general competence within the system, but we probably need to move in a slightly different direction. But in the last 10 years, all we've really done is tighten the screw. And the consequence of that is that the disadvantages are now outweighing some of the advantages because you can, as you rightly say, Kai, you can be judged to be a good school. Indeed, in some inspection frameworks, you can be judged to be an outstanding school and still have all of those problems that I was identifying, and so were you.
So one of the things that I'm noticing out in Oman, as you're aware, I lead two schools, one in the north of Oman and one in the south of Oman, and we recruit a number of teachers from the UK every year. And what we have been starting to see, I think, in recent years is teachers who are arriving at our school, and if they've spent maybe 2 or 3 years or maybe longer in a school in the state system in England, they've got used to being told exactly how to teach. This, I think, might be linking to your point about inspection is taking the joy out of teaching. The opportunity to create learning seems to have been taken away from these teachers and they're being told precisely how to teach. Is this something that's happening across the system as a part of the inspection system?
Well, I think the inspection system drives that kind of behaviour in some circumstances. So you've got a compliance model, and basically when a school is coming up for inspection, then the whole of the senior leadership team of the school are trying to make sure that their school does well. I might add that takes an absolutely enormous amount of time, and there's a cost-benefit question here that they could be using that time in different kinds of ways. But basically, they're putting pressure on their entire team to make sure that they are compliant. And the consequence of that is that everybody becomes obsessed with demonstrating compliance as opposed to actually doing what professionally they feel is important. And the way in which some school groups in particular have tackled this is to say, well, we'll reduce the risk. And the way we reduce the risk is that we effectively tell our teachers how to teach. They have to follow, in some cases, a playbook, which actually tells them precisely what to teach when and in what ways. And all of that moves the teacher from being a professional in a profession to being a technician within the system. And frankly, it's just not very rewarding. If you're a teacher, all of that creativity you're talking about, all those aha moments, which is what makes teaching such fun to do, makes it really great, all of that gets eroded and you're just following somebody else's template. And that in itself is one of the reasons why so many teachers find it such an unsatisfactory profession, and why we are seeing increasing numbers of teachers leaving the profession within the first 5 years after they join.
Yeah, I think it's a really sad situation where the creative opportunities for creating learning experiences for young people while they do consume time and add to the workload pressure. But as a teacher, and I know many teachers who really enjoy that creative design work, and that's been taken away. And it seems, well, certainly when these teachers then turn up at my schools in Oman, they've been de-skilled. And we then have to retrain them how to teach creatively in a way that is genuinely engaging for the sorts of learning that our students are used to. I guess that's one impact that I'm noticing. The other impact I think I'm seeing, and I've been seeing for a while now, is when I speak to fellow head teachers or I look at some of the school websites of state schools in England. And as when you train to be a head teacher, whether you do something like MPQH or CPH, the COBIS program for aspiring heads, you're told a lot about the importance of having a vision for your school. And it seems that a significant number of schools I've come across in England in the last few years, it seems their vision is to gain an Ofsted grade. That seems an incredibly limiting vision for a school. Is that happening across the system? Is that your experience?
Often when I talk to a school about, they tell me they want to become world class, and I say, well, there are certain ways in which I think I might be able to help you with that, and do you want to know more about it? There is a worrying proportion of people whose next question is, what will the inspectors say? It's as if what the inspectors say dominates whatever you're doing. So whatever you've been doing in your training, Kai, about the fact that you should have a vision for your school and be realising it, it's superseded by the fact that if your vision isn't the same vision as Ofsted's, Ofsted trumps your vision.
It sounds like we're in a pretty bad place in England with regards to not just the inspection system, but the impact that's having on teachers, the impact that's having on schools' ambition. And what I think you're then saying, it's time to rethink this, which I think is really refreshing and bold. And I think from my experience, I think this is long overdue. So I'm really glad that we're having this discussion. I'm really glad that you're setting out now, I think, what a different vision might look like for how we support schools in this area of school inspection accreditation. So let's go into that now, Deborah. What might a redesigned, not a retweaked or a reviewed, a redesigned school inspection system look like as we move into the future?
So I'm not even sure that that we need a school inspection system in its current form, because you've got to remember that what I said before is the school inspection system is about measuring compliance against a template. So if you move away from the idea that you have one template, one size fits all, and instead you start to look more at the context in which schools are operating, you may need a different kind of quality assurance system, and that may or may not be inspection. But the starting point is not what the inspection or quality assurance framework looks like. It's more about what are we trying to achieve? Because if you don't have a sense of the purpose of what you're trying to achieve, then obviously, however you're looking at quality assuring it, you're on really shifting sands, aren't you? So, and I think I just say, by way of this, I don't think this is an English problem. I think this is a global problem. Anywhere where you've got regulation, and whether that's formal regulation from government or it's one of the many schemes that come along and give you a badge to say that you're an okay school, that's all part of the same thing. It's all part of saying this is compliance, this is what compliance looks like, and we're telling you whether you're complying. What I'm saying is that we need to develop a system whereby what you talked about, your vision for your school, your students, your parents, your teachers, that's what you should be quality assuring, is how close are you getting to your vision.
So we would start off in this new quality assurance system. So we've moved away from school inspection. At the moment, we're going to call it a quality assurance system or process. I'm, as a school leader and as a school, we're setting out very clearly our vision for what we're trying to achieve. And so again, with the guidance of your work, we not only have a vision for our school, we also have a vision for the type of students that we want to create and nurture in our school. So what then might different elements of this quality assurance system look like?
What you do in school is, at least to some extent, and in some cases to a large extent, dictated by the policy above, which is driving your behaviours. So I think, school improvement at the policy level was about creating this universal competence. And what I'm saying that we kind of need to move on to is being more ambitious in what a system of excellence really looks like. And so some of the things I think are important in that, which are kind of missing from school improvement, is we want schools that work for all children and young people, not just for some of them. So it's just not really acceptable in a world-class system to have your highest and lowest achievers not performing very well, or your children with special educational needs being deemed as incapable of achieving highly, or for social mobility to be stagnant. So, the Sutton Trust says that 25 years of social mobility work in England has led nowhere, that we're no further on than we were before. If we're going to have a system of excellence, we've got to tackle those really big questions. It's got to be a school that is genuinely working for all students. That's my kind of first point. The second point is, as you mentioned, I think it's important to be very clear about what kind of student you want to create. And it has to be a student that's going to be able to thrive in this very complex world. I mean, it's interesting, this morning, in January 2026, the Oxford University Press had its most popular word with children for the year. And the word they chose was peace. So what that suggests is two things. I mean, it suggests first and foremost that they're very well informed. And secondly, that their concerns are at the macro level, not just, small-scale concerns. And that's because they're living in a very complex world. So what we now know is having knowledge is important. Let no one tell you that, Google can give you all the knowledge you need and therefore we don't need to teach knowledge. It's nonsense. Of course we need knowledge. But equally important in terms of all of this are the skills, the values, the attitudes, the ways of thinking, problem solving. They're all fundamental parts of the pedagogy that you need in schools, because you need your students to be able to equip themselves to be able to make judgments. I mean, when they read on social media, they've got to make a decision about whether they think that the information that they're reading is actually valid or not valid. Those things are more important now than the days where you had a textbook and it told you and you were fine about it. So what we know, and OECD have been very, very eloquent on this matter, Andreas Schleier particularly, is that we need students who have enough agency to be able to navigate their own world. And so the whole process of education should be about developing that agency within the individual student. So it needs suitable curriculum, suitable pedagogy and suitable assessment, most of which is assessment for learning, and a minimum of it is assessment of learning. Whereas in the compliance model, you're assessing, your priority, for example, is assessment of learning because you're proving compliance. So you're measuring rather than building. And in this new model of excellence, you need to be building competence in every single student. OECD say that we need all students to be able to operate at high levels. That's only going to happen if you're building a student's intelligence deliberately and systematically, as well as teaching them the facts about the British Civil War. Those two things can't be mutually exclusive. They have to be part and parcel of the same thing. So we want to move beyond this idea of good and into this idea of independent, confident, socially confident, but also intellectually confident students. And one of the areas where, I feel really passionately is I've spent the whole of my career researching into how the most effective learners think and learn. And we know that pretty much everyone is capable of achieving that. But we still persist in the school improvement methodology in rationing success. So we've got the old bell curve with a proportion of people doing very well, most of them doing okay, and some of them inevitably struggling. That's got to go. It's got to go, because if you're in the other two categories of not doing quite so well, you will not find it easy to thrive in the very complex, sophisticated world in which you have to operate. So we, as a school system, if we want a school system of excellence, those are at the heart. The student is at the heart, the independent student who's got the agency to be confident and to be able to operate with confidence, even when things are unfamiliar. They should find the unfamiliar the norm, not being something that frightens them.
You're still working with schools in the HPL network, so maybe you could just take one of those schools and give us a concrete example of a school that is adopting this framework, and what might this redesigned framework learn from what's actually going on in some of the schools that are adopting this HPL philosophy and framework and way of working?
So I'm going to pick a couple of schools, Kai, if that's okay. And the first one I want to pick is Wales International School. So the first thing is, when the school wants to move beyond school improvement, it usually has a reason why that is the case. And in their case, one of the reasons was they have a staff which comprises of people drawn from all over the world with very different educational traditions. So what they wanted was a cohesive pedagogical framework which would bring them all together around a common purpose. And what Joanna said was that, she feels that this diversity has benefits. Let's not pretend that it's a problem necessarily. But nonetheless, we need to find some consensus within it so that we can all head in the same direction. And so they went through what is the sort of formal process of adopting the way of working from HPL. And I'd say here that this is not about adopting a programme. HPL isn't a programme. It's a way of thinking. And so the first piece was about familiarisation, and it was about, getting familiar with the basic ideas in high-performance learning and in all the beyond school improvement kind of models, which is to say, basically, this system has to work for everyone. So everyone can. And as you say, I know that's central to how you think at your schools, Kai. And then secondly, that there are certain types of ways of thinking and values, attitudes and attributes, which if your students master them, they are more effective cognitively. And so from the teaching perspective, you're trying to get them to operate in that kind of way. So what does that mean for you as a teacher? It means that you're going to enhance your teaching rather than disrupt it. And that's a really important thing in this familiarisation stage, that you can't expect that teachers are going to want to drop what they've been doing up until now and do something completely different. And by goodness, they've been asked many times to do that. What this is saying is that the research evidence suggests if you bring certain things rather more to the fore in your teaching, you'll get more bang for your buck. So what that's really kind of saying is that you're probably doing quite a lot of this already, but if you do it more systematically and more deliberately, your students they are more likely to master these very important kind of competencies. So Wales started with that, and right from the get-go, ADEC, who is their inspection authority, were pleased. They said, we can see that you're cultivating an environment of excellence. You're being overt about it. That's what you're saying through HPL. And whereby, and I think this is really important, whereby students are inspired to take ownership for their own educational journey. So this is a key component of the world of beyond school improvement. It's with students, not to students. If we want to create the kind of sophisticated student that we're talking about here, you can't do it to them. You have to engage them in the process. It has to be with them. Of course, when Joanna started out at Wales, there was some scepticism. What a surprise. Here it is, a principal with another whizzy idea. We've all seen many of them. But that's the key about strong, good leadership. It's also with your teachers, not to them. It's about taking the time to explore the ideas and to think about, what might work and what might not. And the thing that is probably crucial at this particular stage that they did in Wales is it changes your professional development offer. So what you're saying is you're moving away from teaching to a template and you're asking your staff to diagnose what's necessary within their own classrooms. So that means you're going to invest more heavily in professional development and in a different kind of professional development. So a bit of a move away from going on the course and rather more about peer-to-peer observation, more coaching within school, developing your teachers. And then you finally kind of move into the fourth phase, which is optimization, where all the practices are in place and now you're trying to really focus in deeply on particular elements and trying to maximize those. And it's interesting, the impact is that they've got much enhanced academic results. They've got happy parents. They've got a 47% decrease in staff turnover and the 87% enhanced job satisfaction for teachers. But most crucially for them, they've got students, and that's what they say, this is what Joanna says, is they have students who tackle challenges with optimism and resilience. And that, in the end, when you start to talk about what you want in a quality assurance framework, that's what you want to know. Are your students in that kind of space? Because all of the other things are just indicators that they are. So the fact that your academic standards are going up are an indicator that you've got your students working in that kind of way.
Just a quick pause in the conversation. If you're finding this episode useful, it would mean a great deal if you could hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening. It helps more educators discover these conversations and tells us to keep creating them. So, if you haven't already, take a moment now to subscribe to the show. Let's get straight back into the discussion. What I'd like to then get a better understanding of then, in this new quality assurance world, what might that quality assurance process look like? How might it be different from this school improvement inspection paradigm that we've been with for more than 30 years?
The thing about the compliance model in school improvement is someone else's model rather than your model. And so basically it's like you're working to the recipe and then you're kind of saying, I used your recipe, come along and see whether the cake turned out okay. But what we're saying here is this is our recipe. This is the kind of cake we want to create. Can you just come along and give us your external pair of eyes on this? But we ourselves have a view on this. We know where we think. Now, we know that in inspection frameworks, they have tried to create that kind of quality assurance in the past where, self-evaluation before you have external evaluation. But the problem that's come in school improvement is that the external evaluation has so much weight that people's self-evaluations are seen as secondary. They're not so important. And what I'm saying is your own evaluation, holding accountability for it, is probably one of the most important things of all. This is a trust thing. The system has to trust the schools have to trust the teachers have to trust the students. That's the way you build really world-class environments. If we start with suspicion, the system is suspicious of the school is suspicious of its teachers, and the teachers are suspicious of their students, all you get is adequate performance.
I'm actually getting excited about quality assurance. Probably the first time in my career where I'm listening to this, because you're saying, well, as a school, rather than assess yourself against a list of standards which are externally determined for you, create your own accountability framework. And so there's a creative piece there. And I think that's a great opportunity to really think about what you're trying to achieve and how you know that you're achieving that. And then you assess yourself against that, your own accountability framework, and then get a critical friend to come in and look at it and challenge you, support you, challenge you. But that seems a completely different way of working. I think you're making a very good case that the existing system is holding back excellence, is holding back teachers, students, schools reaching even higher levels of excellence. And I guess what I'm also reflecting on there as you're talking, Deborah, is about the importance of discussing the aims and the purposes of education. And some of the best debates I've had with colleagues, with students, with parents, with other educators over the last decade or so is when we open up this conversation about, well, what is the purpose of what we're doing day in, day out? And it seems to me that not enough schools do that, which seems bizarre. We turn up every day and we're not clear about our purpose. That is an issue, I believe. But I also wonder, on a more of a macro scale, if we're going to have a chance of creating a quality assurance system which re-energizes the profession, re-energizes school leaders, re-energizes school communities, which I think it will do we not as a system need to have this discussion about what the purpose of education is?
Policymakers are also caught up in the kind of deficit model. So it's, we need to sort out this problem or sort out that problem or sort out another problem. What we really do need is to take a step back and say, look, instead of trying to rectify these small deficits, some of which are significant in terms of, something like social mobility. It's a really important thing. But the fact is, we need to take a step back and say, the world has changed. People have been saying this for such a long time. Years and years ago, I used to work in the same university as Ken Robinson. Do you remember him? Talking about how the Victorian state of education hadn't changed at all. We were still educating people for the 19th century, let alone the 21st century. And that it all needed to change. Well, we keep saying this, but we're not actually doing anything about it. And I think what I'm saying is that we can't move beyond competence unless we start to have that debate about what excellence really means and what excellence means in the world in which we live. And it's not about, kind of whether we have a different structure. I've lived through everything from, specialist schools, grant maintained schools, all kinds of different sorts of structures. It's not about structures. It's about, at the heart of it, this is about educating children and young people. And how do we have a system which enables everyone to thrive and develop in the way that's going to help them do better? So I totally agree with you. And, there's an interesting thing about this. I think that for people who work in education, they've got a bit of, understandably, consultation fatigue, where they've been asked to comment on all kinds of different kinds of ideas. But I think what we're talking about here is a sort of a bigger debate, a big education debate. And not just in England, it's across the world. What is it we really, really want in our particular kind of country? In my experience, actually, certain other countries are rather more open to that than we are in England. That sometimes because they're countries that are developing really fast and therefore they're not just taking an incremental step forward, they're trying to reinvent themselves, and they're thinking about what would that reinvention look like. For example, we have an interest in schools in Vietnam, and one of the top schools that we work with, they went through the kind of process of saying, well, we've been through a 3-stage process. We went through a process whereby our students were performing really well on the national measures. Then we decided we needed them to compete internationally, so we became a Cambridge school and started to work on an internationally recognised curriculum and assessment framework. And now we're moving into working with you because we want students to be more independent and in control of their own learning. So they're systematically moving through really very big stages. Obviously, England is where I have trained and spent. I come from an English education tradition, even when we're working in international schools. I think sometimes we're not stepping back in that kind of way. We're just making minor tweaks to a system. And I think that's really what I'm saying, is that we've made lots of tweaks. They've been good tweaks for the most part. Sometimes they haven't worked out, but we can't tweak it anymore. We need to go back and have a debate about something much more fundamental. And, why am I saying this? Because I'm frustrated by it, that I'm coming to the end of my career and I see us having so much possibility and not grasping it, because it's like we're held back by a system that we've been using that we can't let go of. And I think you're right to ask the question about, what can individual school leaders do in all of this? I think there's a lot they can do, and they will still score really highly on the school improvement inspection frameworks. It's not like I have to drop school improvement and do this instead. We've got lots of schools who are judged outstanding on the conventional frameworks. But the fact is that system-wide, school improvement, I do genuinely believe, has made a contribution, but we're kind of ready for something different. And the debate, as you say, starts with what is it we want to do.
I've been based in Oman now for nearly 15 years, and there's a fantastic museum that's opened about 150 miles from Muscat in Nizwa called Across the Ages. And it's a wonderful record of the natural history of Oman, and then they go into the political history of Oman. It's beautifully created, very engaging, and it's a great learning space. But then the final bit of the museum actually looks to the future, not to the past, and articulates very clearly, which you can also find on the internet and websites and so on, the vision for Oman 2040. And also the vision not only for Oman 2040, but the vision for education in Oman for 2040. And it's really specific. And it's also reduced, if you check it out on the internet, to a one-pager. And there are very clear objectives of what Oman is trying to achieve between now and 2040 with its education system. I mean, you've worked with quite a lot of policymakers, you've worked with governments, both within the UK and beyond. What I'm curious about is why is there a reluctance to have that debate about what the purpose of education should be in the UK, and try to articulate a vision? Why haven't we got UK 2040 and our vision for education in the UK in 2040? Why are we reluctant to have that debate and to map out that vision?
Well, I think the short answer to that, Kai, is short-termism. So education is highly political in the UK, and whoever is Secretary of State for Education wants to make their mark. And I had a period of time in my career where I was working direct government ministers, and it was a time when there was a fair amount of change. And actually there is a lot of change in terms of Secretaries of State and also ministers for schools. And I used to be driving down the motorway and hear the news and hear that there was a reshuffle, and that somebody else was going to be in charge. And I knew what would come next is that I would have they would call me in for a chat, and the chat would start by saying, I want to make a difference while I'm here. And when you start to talk to them about things that you've been doing that are working well, they're like, no, that was somebody else's policy. I want a different policy. I want it to be mine. So there's a kind of that sort of very short-term view, whereas I did some work with the EDB, the Education Bureau in Hong Kong, and I've been working with this particular team, and I was asked if I would zoom into a retirement function for their leader. And I was flattered to be asked. It was very nice. But I said to him, that they'd made a lot of progress in the time that he'd been in charge of this particular policy, and that, I thought it was admirable. And he said, "You've only been doing it for 14 years. We barely started." And that's the difference, is the idea that if you're going to bring around long-term sustainable change, you have to have a continuous investment in something. I mean, going back to Joanna Paval, or I could mention Fiona Cotton's school, Heartland, which is a very, very different kind of school, who, when they were adopting HPL were adopting it for very different reasons. They were adopting it not because they did want consistency across their teaching staff, but the more important for them was that they had very highly skilled and qualified teaching staff, and they wanted a more ambitious goal for them. And so the whole kind of process by which they adopted this was completely different, because it was all about hearts and minds, about, should we be just complacent and say, we're doing really well, we've got outstanding in every category on our BSO inspections, let's just sit back. No, not a bit of it. It's like, well, that's fine, we've ticked the box over there, but what we really want to do in our vision is something more ambitious than that. And I think that, we in England, we do need that kind of ambitious vision, but it is only of use if we've got political consensus across the political parties, because otherwise it will be in place for a limited amount of time and then probably changed, either because you have a change of leadership within education, within the existing administration, or the administration changes. And what we want is a move away from that turbulence, because in reality, you can only build excellence over time. And it's the short-termism which is the biggest problem of all.
If you're a school leader and you're really interested in what you're hearing in this conversation, and we are not government ministers in the UK, but I also do believe that policy follows practice, and I think the more that ministers, policymakers see what's going on in Heartland International, in Wales International, in my own school, there are schools who are going beyond compliance, going beyond standards in the way that you've described. But if you're a school leader, or maybe if you're a teacher, and you want to take a first step into this new territory of school-determined quality assurance, what might you suggest that a school could start to do just to take a step forward into this new territory?
There are schools stepping into that territory, and it's always been my kind of theory of change idea, which was that you create enough of those kinds of schools that the system starts to pay attention. And I think we're beginning to get there, but I think that's partly why I'm talking to you in the way I'm talking to you, because I think we need to now be bolder and get out there and stand up for it. But in terms of if you want to sort of start to gently move into that space, if you're in a leadership position within school, I think the first thing is that you focus on your vision, and that means taking ownership for your own success and holding yourself accountable for improving the school that you lead. So the school community is responsible for the school first and foremost. And you can do that without any frightening the horses with any external regulators. The second is you stop having this plethora of different programs to solve different kinds of problems. Start to think about things holistically from the point of view of our students functioning well within our environment, and equally are our staff functioning well within our environment. I think you need to focus on pedagogy alongside curriculum knowledge and assessment. And as I say, with focus, assessment for learning dominates, with some assessment of learning, but mostly assessment for learning. But you do need to focus on a pedagogy that creates this student agency, this with students, not to them. And in order to do it with students, not to them, they need to know what's important in their learning. They need to have their own kind of sense of the toolkit, because if they don't, they can't be autonomous and independent. They're still dependent on somebody else telling them whether it's right. So you can do all of that. And then finally, I think you need to move from, as a leader, from telling teachers how to teach, and the absolute anathema to me of playbooks. And you've got to replace it with, I think the term that's often used now is aligned autonomy. So this isn't all soft. I'm not talking about soft, fuzzy stuff here. So aligned autonomy, the idea being that there are certain things that we all agree have to be in place, and you have to be aligned to that. But beyond that, you have the autonomy and the respect to develop your professional practice in a way that enables you over time to become a better and better teacher. And we'll support you in doing that. And as you said, there are people out there, kind of facilitating this. And I'm just going to mention, because I really like it, Simon O'Connor's setting up the Centre for Education Action Research, that whole kind of focus on there are certain approaches which are being used more and more in the kind of schools that are moving into the space that we're talking about. And it is a move towards supporting teachers to be better professionals, whether it's through doing their own research, whether it's through coaching them, peer-to-peer opportunities to develop. That kind of idea that what you're saying to your professionals is, I'm satisfied with what you're doing now, but I'm sure you could do even better. And that over your career, you will get to be a better and better teacher. And I think all of that can happen, all those cultural changes. And finally, you would expect me to say as my final thing that I think the biggest change of all is the one that you have in your school, and which all the high-performance learning schools have and many other schools do, which is that you have to start signalling to students that you believe they can do well. And if they're not doing well now, it's just not yet. It's still within their capabilities. Because, all of us in our lives have been underestimated at various times. And we all know how painful that is. And in a similar kind of way, all of us have had people who have really believed in us. And sometimes that's meant we've done more than we thought we could. Last year, an occurrence happened for me with one of my grandchildren where he was excited, really, really excited about the fact that they were going to start swimming lessons at school. And he was really keen, and he said, I like swimming, I can swim a length, I'm confident. He was very confident in the water. I'm really looking forward to it. He went to the first swimming lesson. He came home, and we asked, how did the swimming go? He said, I'm in group 2, and nobody explained why. He said, I asked why am I not in group 1, nobody tell me. And then that weekend, his dad said, do you want to go swimming this weekend? And he said, no, I'm a rubbish swimmer. Because that's what we do when we're in the business of casually segmenting students and giving them a sense of themselves, which is that they can't achieve. So I'm not saying that that my grandchild should not have been in group 2, but I'm saying that somebody should have explained the reason you're, do a bit of a pep talk, a coaching talk with group 2, saying the reason you're in group 2 is that people who are in group 1 can do this, this and this. Right now, you can't do that, but we're going to fix that. And what we need to do is, we need to put more effort into it and do a bit more practice. And then he'd be coming home saying, Dad, you have to take me swimming because I need to learn this. And that is what, at the heart of what we're talking about here, is about assuming and acting as if everybody can do it, even if they're not doing it right now. Because ultimately, everything else in the education system is better when we do.
That's a really lovely way to draw this conversation to a close, that philosophy about believing in each other, that works at a macro level as well as a micro level. It works with the young child who's trying to learn something, and it also works with an education system where you've got people turning up every day who are really trying, quite often against incredible odds, to do a fantastic job for young people. And we need, as leaders, to believe in our colleagues. As teachers, colleagues, we need to believe in our young people. As parents, we need to believe in our children. But also countries, governments need to believe in what they've got. This is a really important conversation. I've always valued the conversations that we've had, Deborah, throughout my leadership career. We've probably had a conversation at least once a year, and you always challenge my thinking. You always help me think differently. And I'm expecting this conversation will be energizing educators all over the world. And somehow we need to get to the land that you are painting. And I'm really glad that people like you are being optimistic, being hopeful, being ambitious for what we are doing in schools all over the world. So thank you for the conversation today, and we really look forward to your book that will be out very shortly, and best of luck with that. And so thank you very much for all you do for schools, teachers, educators and young people all over the world. Thank you for listening to the Educators Corner podcast, a BSM BSS production. This episode was produced by Laura Wilkes with post-production by her team at Communicating for Impact. If you'd like to go beyond the corner and explore the ideas from today's episode more deeply, subscribe to KaiPod News, the newsletter for curious educators. Let's keep this conversation going between the podcast episodes.